Okay, thank you all for coming. We are very honored today to have Dr. Ben Geva from Osgoode Hall Law School come to speak to us about payments, money, payments, digitization, evolution, revolution, and the law. So everything you wanted to know about Bitcoin and more. I'm really looking forward to it because that's something that's been in the news a lot. I'm sure you've seen the Facebook page, and we've been posting articles as they come up, so a very hot topic. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Geva.
Thank you very much. It's really my honor and pleasure to be here, and even I in some way was disappointed to find out that the weather warmed up for me. Because everybody asks me, how is Manitoba, how is Winnipeg? And I say, you know what, it's quite warm, I can't tell you much.
Wait till tomorrow morning.
No, they said it's going to be warmer. That's the point. Yeah. So anyway, two types of audiences are going to be disappointed. You will not find out at the end of this talk if it is a good idea to invest in Bitcoin. That is one thing that you will not find out. I mean, they used to say it about economics, that economy is a science that teaches you that last year was the best year for do shopping. So I think that academics is, we are academics. So that's one audience that is going to be disappointed. The other segment of the audience that is going to be disappointed, that they would think that they will become technologically whiz, will know everything about blockchain, etc. No, I mean, I must admit that when I started law, it was laws, and it's, we say law and economics, law and society. I think that law and technology is a little bit above the capacity of a reasonable lawyer, but I'll do my best. Anyway, so what I will do is then, that the main thing, we'll talk about the whole, what is said, the digital currency issue, or the phenomena, maybe it's better than issue to say. And we'll, of course, the first part of the lecture will be kind of giving the context, because after all, that's what we have to find out. Evolution, revolution, and then where the law stands as to all that. So, for one thing is, of course, this is kind of the question is, with what we pay. When we say means of payment, we essentially pay with, today, with coins and banknotes issued by the central bank. And the other ways that we pay with is balances in bank account, which we tend to call commercial bank money, which in principle or also in law, they are redeemable to banknotes and coins. So in other words, there is a relationship between these two top bullets, but in general, most of us don't bother to do this redemption, and we are very happy to get balances in our bank account and, take cash only as much as we need. And then what we have now is this kind of the next stage of whether, in general, the whole question, because the first top here is all issued by the, this is issued by the state, this is redeemable to something issued by the state or the central bank. And here, there's the possibility of the privately issued, and then, digitally, and then, of course, what does it mean? And if digitally is issued alternative privately also, then the question is, can we go full circle and have the central bank issued digital currency, and what it means? So all this, of course, begs the question as to what money is, and there are kind of two, this is the first extreme definition, which I'm going very quickly to reject, and that is that the quality of money is attributed to chattels which issue the authority of law and denominated with reference to unit of account are meant to serve as universal means of exchange in the state of issue. In other words, it's linking it both to the state and to the first, that it has to be something tangible. And as you see, this book, Man, is now into maybe the 7th, if not 8th edition. And the reason why I cited this 92 edition is that it didn't repeat this statement in any of the future editions. because this is a kind of too narrow definition. He tried to make a distinction between money and obligation to pay money, which like when you have the bank deposit, it's obligation to pay money. But at the end of the day, if you get this obligation as means of payment and you feel that your debt has been satisfied, then this is the, well, then basically this is money. So then the next definition is again, well, it's even older. So it's not just question of evolution, it's question of, on one hand, there was a state theory of money, which is now, as I'm saying, tend by itself, just to say this is descriptively correct, that money today that we use is issued by the state, but it's not something inherent in the nature of money. And then Lord Mansfield, in a classic 18th century case, said that money is whatever common consent has fixed upon as a sign denoting value. And though, well, of course, mainly then it was gold, silver, then it was paper money. That was a big thing at that time. But the idea is that whatever common consent has fixed as a sign of denoting value. And then we get to these two definitions, which is, as he says, the second is Canadian, but both of them are in the same kind of line, which is pretty much what we would think money in the broad sense. It's whatever, you know, passes freely from hand to hand throughout the community in final discharge of debts, being accepted equally without reference to the character or credit of the person who offers it. That's kind of very important. In other words, this is kind of jokes that you are of such good reputation that it's okay, I will accept from you cash. So that we don't care much about your credit worthiness. Well, of course, there is always the danger of counterfeit, okay? We don't go that far, okay? But as long as we are sure that what you have here is cash, then we don't care who you are and how bad your credit worthiness. And yeah, and that's the idea, it passes freely from hand to hand. And then, you know, well, then there was this kind of, the decision of the Supreme Court, but about the Alberta credit, a social credit experiment that they, well, will not go into it, but essentially what the Supreme Court of Canada did say that money is commonly understood is not necessarily legal tender, and again I'll explain what's legal tender, any medium which by practice fulfills the function of money and which everybody will accept in payment of a debt is actually money. Legal tender is a narrower concept than what people think. Is essentially the concept is that in the absence of agreement, this is something that you have to accept in payment of a debt. In other words, if I owe you $20 and we are in Canada and I offer you this green piece of paper which does tell $20, you can't say, no, I don't want this one. Okay, it is by law, this is an effective tender of a debt of $20. But of course, by the same token, I can give you 2 tens. The idea, though, that of course we can agree that payment would be in US dollars and then the legal tender would mean nothing, or we can agree that the debt will be discharged by a bag of potatoes. Either way, it's so that's what I'm saying. Legal tender is kind of a narrower kind of a concept, but it is in the absence of agreement, this is what you are accept to have to pay. So all in all, these are kind of the features of money that we tend now to more to abstract them. There has to be unit of account, that we will be able to compare orange and apples in a sense of how much they cost. There has to be the medium of exchange, that this idea that it has to be used by people for making payment. And storage of value. Storage of value is, again, we are trying to say it doesn't mean that it keeps its value in a way that you'll keep it under the mattress or under the pillow and it will be good value forever. We are not, the idea is not to encourage hoarding, but the idea is that when you get it, you don't think immediately how to get rid of it because tomorrow it will be worth less, which happens, of course, in hyperinflation. Okay, but in normal situation, you put it in the wallet, you use it when you need it, okay? But the same is the balance in your bank account. You don't, you know, if you are lucky to have too big balance, then you start thinking how to invest it or how not. But otherwise, you just leave it in the account. it's good in terms of the near future. It is kind of a, so to speak, good storage of value. Now, there are all sorts of, now I don't want to get, but this has kind of become a little bit more this idea that actually more, I don't know, no, I wouldn't say topical, but more kind of timely to challenge things that, okay, historically we used to say that money came out of improvement to the barter system, but then Graeber, who is an anthropologist and historian, says, no, money was no more invented than music, etc. What we call money is not a thing. It was comparing things mathematically as proportions of saying that if x is worth equivalent of 6 of y. Yeah, that is true. It is true, but it doesn't tell you the whole story. Of course, unit of account historically preceded this idea of some kind of a medium of exchange. But at the end, there was this idea of medium of exchange that developed out of improvement to the barter system. And, well, of course, Graeber would say that there has never been society that was completely on barter. He might be right, and probably he's right, but again, there have never been societies that made the social contract of Rousseau, and we are still using it as a concept in political science. So at the end of the day, it's true, money might have started as unit of account, might have used by way of efficiency to pay soldiers that you couldn't get paid by chicken because they couldn't carry it to the battlefield, so they were paying with something small like piece of gold, but eventually it took over as something that is used as in commerce. And originally, and this is what is important, and this is still the Austrian theory of money, that actually does say that you do need something specific that will be the most tradable kind of asset that could kind of move freely from hand to hand. People will accept it for everything and then will be able to use it for everything. And this is, as I say, the most marketable commodity and most sellable asset, the one asset whose holders can sell at most of ease in favorable conditions. And now, this is, I'll explain very briefly, ratio to stock to the flow. It means that if you have, and without getting too much into complicated economics, if you do have certain amount of money supply now, and because it's so good, there is great demand for it, then it's still, no matter what you will do, it will not increase indefinitely the amount. This is the flow. In other words, this is the growth in the next period. And that's why gold was so good, that no matter how you will improve the way of getting gold, you could not increase its amount indefinitely, and which was the opposite of bronze, that you could always improve the system and get more bronze, and that's why bronze was bad money, gold was good money. And we'll go back to this kind of relationship, stock and flow, later on when we'll talk on Bitcoin. But for a while, money was basically kind of linked to the gold, and this is kind of the more very quickly development or evolution, or which is kind of what Graeber tend to reject historically, but in terms of the model, that's how it was. First there was barter, then there was primitive money, that is to say certain assets had a use value, but also became a, so to speak, used as money. Then the best has become weighed in standardized pieces of metal, and once they were given the stamp of the state, they became coins. Then there was this paper money, which, while originally issued was sometimes by government, sometimes by banks, but eventually the one that took over was by banks, and later on by government banks, the central bank, and the paper money, which originally was just a promise to pay money, and the money was a metal. That now goes back to these things that Lord Mansfield was saying earlier. It is when the paper has become used on its own as a means of payment, and then it became money. But at the end, until the 20th century, now we are not talking anymore antiquity or Middle Ages, the banknote was a promise to pay money. And if you go to England, you will find that to this, or you look at the English banknote or Indian banknote, they would still have a promise to pay, which is, of course, today completely sterile. It's not, you will go to Bank of England, you'll get another piece of paper, but but until the beginning of until somewhere in the 20th century, you'll still be entitled to get the gold, the real thing. And what we call bank money, which is then the next one, is actually the money which is deposited in the bank account. E-money, now we start to getting into a concept which, unfortunately, there is a lot of misuse of the language, so I'll tell you what I think would be the best way to define it and so why it's different from digital money and from anything else. E-money is something which we don't have that much anymore. It was more of kind of an experiment of loading a value on a device. In other words, not credit card which is linked to a credit line or debit card which is limited to a bank account, but rather you withdraw the money from your bank account, you put it on the device, and then when you, on the chips card, and then when you go and pay, it will be deducted from the chips card. They will not have to contact your bank about your, whether there is balance or whatever it is. This is the true meaning of e-money, which is still in a sense a category of bank money, because it's kind of more decentralized bank account. And the reason why I emphasize it, because many people will later on, we'll talk about virtual and digital in kind of e-money with the same breath, but it is absolutely incorrect. What is virtual digital? Well, stay tuned. For this, you have to stay to the end of the lecture. But they are different from anything else here, and this is now the question of the evolution revolution. Okay. Now this is just, again, I mean, fundamentals that essentially when you put money in a bank, it's not your money. Essentially, it is, actually, I did already hinted it, but again, in terms of legal principle, it is what you do have is a debt. The bank owes you money. The money belongs to the bank. The bank can do with it whatever they want, of course, subject to regulation and subject to political outcry if they will put money into slavery in South Sudan or I don't know what. But legally, in terms of the private law contract, they can do with it whatever they want. It is their money. They just owe it to you. So it's not money in a bank. The word deposit is misleading. It's not a drawer where you do have your money, but rather there is a debt of the bank which owes to you. This slide is kind of, I'll spend a few more minutes than the others, but it does show you how everything so far has been sort of evolution. So there were chattels, as I say, they became primitive money. This is, as I'm saying, the type of chattels that were used both as monetary items and use value. Then that was fixed on precious metal, that's metallic money, coin. You deposited the metallic money, the coins, and that were created the bank account. Now with the bank account, you do have all these means how you do transfer money, which is in a bank account, either by checks or by, again, debit transfers. And again, I will not have time to go through all that, but when you give your insurance company authority to draw your money each month, or credit transfer when your employer pays you each month's salaries, they don't give you checks anymore, you find the money in the bank account. And there is a wire transfer. I don't want kind of, no time to go into all of that, but all these methods of payment are through the bank deposit. Now, from the inadequacies of the checks led to the payment cards, which is a credit card, debit card, store value card, that's the e-money. Eventually, you can put it all on mobile. This is mobile payment. These are all kind of, again, things which I'll not have time to go. And then the checks were improved also to check which is drawn by the bank. From the bank deposits, you got the bills of exchange. From the coin, you did get eventually the banknote, which is promised to pay the coin. and the banknote led to the promissory note, the banknote led to paper money. What is this square? It's kind of interesting. Historically, all this is a net in which the law, the Bills of Exchange Act, the law of negotiable instrument, caught all this instrument. All the rest stayed outside, which might have been some kind of historical accident. But anyways, this is why you do have this box. So far, and this is now, as I'm saying, we are still before the digital virtual, is this kind of evolution. And the way that our national payment system looks is kind of the pyramid that we do have big banks called indirect clearer has account with the central banks, small banks with big banks, customers with either small banks or big banks, and payments are done by adjustment to bank account using any of the devices that I kind of put earlier here. Okay, so that is pretty much how our payment system looks like. And the other thing is that I will maybe go directly to the slides, but it's that essentially what we do have is that the central banks have money with the central bank. This is central bank's money. This is the money that banks have with central bank. Now, the banks who have the money with the central bank then lending the money to the people, and this is what created the bank deposits today, and this is the commercial bank money, which is the money that we all use. So we all use either commercial bank money or the banknotes, which are issued by the central bank. Okay, so here we have obligation of the bank, our banks to pay us. Here we do have the banknotes. In theory, they're an obligation of the central bank, but of course it's sterile obligation, but it's good enough for us because we count on our monetary authority. Now, the beauty of this system is that the central bank is, in a way, has a way which is by now tend to be eroded, but it's still there, of controlling the amount of commercial bank money is by playing with interest rates and sale of securities between the central bank and the banks. They kind of basically limit or expand the amount of of central bank money, which allows the bank to shrink or expand the amount of money that we use in the public. Okay, and this is now one of the fears that with private currencies, of course, the central bank is going to lose it. And again, the amount of money in the market is very important because money is a product like any other product, and once it's not gold, then it's up to the central bank essentially to play with its amount. If there is too much money, it's not that we are richer, it simply means that prices goes up, and this is what we call inflation. On the other hand, if the amount becomes too shrinks, then there is deflation. Prices go down, you think that's great. The problem is that it's so great that nobody buys anything because they wait for the prices to go even more down, and then you do have a paralysis. This kind of monetary economy on, so to speak, one foot. So this is pretty much, as I'm saying, the regulation of the money supply. And now what we get is we start kind of getting closer to things. So essentially, meaning of payment is that any act in performance of money obligation. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but methods of payment is either your physical delivery of coins or funds transfers that essentially make your bank owe you the money, and that is the thing. Payment by bank money is making the bank of the payee, that's the one who of the creditor, replacing the payer as payer's debtor. In other words, I owe you $100, and if I pay by bank money, it simply means that at some point your bank owes you this $100 instead of me. And for you, that's good enough. That's exactly the point, because of the trust in the banking system, your ability to convert it to cash whenever you want, your trust that the central bank will not just play with interest rates or whatever, just that the value of the money will decrease, etc., etc., etc. And this is, by the way, that's kind of, again, of course, side point, but that is what we do say about independence of central banks, that's why they shouldn't be part of the direct part of the political system, because the politicians sometimes have interest of showing that things are good and flooding the market, low interest rates, flooding the market, and well, the inflation, that will be after the election, who cares, we'll worry about it later. So the idea is that central bank is not supposed to think like that. So payment by banknote is very simple. You are paying to the payee just physically. When it's a non-cash payment, sometimes it's getting complicated because you and the payee may not have the same bank as account. There may be intermediate banks, so that's why this is kind of a long process. And this is what, as we are going to see soon, the digital currency are supposed to save. To spare with us, or at least in theory. And again, I mean, don't worry about anything here other than the picture of how you have kind of whole series of banks through which the payment is made, just because payer and payee do not have accounts in the same bank, okay? And this two other banks are not, they are not banks not linked directly, they do have to link through accounts with other banks, so that's what is supposed to be a long process. Now, when we get to the digital age, so to speak, now electronic age vis-a-vis digital, and now we're getting to business. So originally, everything which I said so far might have been, I wouldn't say existed forever, but for many years. What started to happen in the end of the 19th century, 20th century, is this was the telecommunication revolution. Okay, so first, just that information or payment devices is not just by pieces of paper. Okay, they could do electronically. Originally, it was a cable, then there was the computer, and eventually that's where we have the payment cards, everything less and less paper. But still, it's the same model, the way that I described it through banks and all that kind of stuff. And then there was also the e-money, which I mentioned, this kind of that you load on the device, the value itself, which didn't actually catch up, but it's still a concept that has to be remembered. Now, what happened in the digital age, or this is where we are now moving it, is three things. First, there start to be, and everybody talks about it as kind of sort of digital money, even though, again, I mean, I'll make some distinctions. First is this ability that instead of, and I'll just go very quickly, not go all the way, don't worry, instead of, sorry, very quickly, instead of we have, no, maybe this one is better. Instead of we, the customers, have only access, other than to banknotes, only to commercial bank money, why we customers should not have access directly to central bank money. This is a first kind of thing that is now, there is a lot of talk on. Second, there is the cryptocurrencies and the blockchain. And third, there is a possibility of centralized digital currency that also have been created and tend to be less sensational, but I think that they have better future. And this is what may be even issued by central bank. So the first thing is that, again, as I mentioned, it's very fundamental that commercial banks today have reserves with the central bank, but then they expand the money by lending people, and then there is some relationship between what we call central bank money and commercial bank money. So one suggestion for revolution is that actually commercial banks will not be allowed to create money in this way, but will only be allowed to distribute central bank money. And this way there will be no issue of the failure of a bank as something which affects the monetary system. So this is called full reserve banking, and you still have account with, this is kind of with your commercial bank. You not deal directly with the central bank, but the central bank, but your commercial bank will have 100%, not fractional reserve, 100% reserve for the payments. And again, why this is digital? It's digital because it all can be seen on the digital devices. It's only in this way it's digital, and that's part of the digital revolution. The other thing is plain sovereign money is that you would have directly account with the central bank. And again, this is divided to two. Some say, well, hold on. central banks are still not in the business of dealing with private customers. I mean, we are not a socialist country, etc., etc. So still banks will be able to give you the services, but there will be more of technical intermediaries. Your account will be actually with the central bank, not with them, but the central bank will be too important for you to access. You will deal with your bank, but your bank, the money will not be on your money will not be on the books of your banks, but rather on the books of the central bank. These are two things which are, as you said, are serious paper from the Bank of England. So it may not be all that exotic, so to speak, but I don't know if it's going to happen. And then we get to the digital coins. And here is now when we start to be a lot of confusion about what words mean. So I like this definition that it is an entity that amount to string of bits and strings that must have numerical value and basically has unique identity. And that's very important because people do confuse between the fact that you have balance in a bank, which is reflected digitally, and they call it digital currency, and the digital coin, which is in theory no different than the $20 bill, except that it's not physical, it is only in the digital world, and it's identified by its mathematical features, and that's how it has its own identity. Okay, that's basically where I'm saying the lawyers start losing the complete control of the facts and understanding, but you have to understand that there could be something which has a digital identity. And this is actually, this is the right meaning of the digital coin. And it can be issued either privately. Okay, this doesn't mean that it has to be issued privately. It could be either privately or by central bank. And then the question is, of course, the regulation and specification. So here we get to very important distinctions. In as much as cash is currency, consists of tangible items, and the banknotes, each one with its own identity, then bank money, even when it is in a digital form, so to speak, has generic value. In other words, when I have such and such money in my bank and I can look at it on my device, it's still, there are no different pieces of items there. There is total balance of $100 or I don't know what. Okay, there is no $1 there. There is no, it's not, you know, I can break as much as I want when I pay, but there is basically a bank balance, okay, generic value. And then, but then the real thing is where money is digitally expressed not only in generic value in the sum of a balance, but also where both the face value and identity are carried digitally. This is through the mathematical properties. Then we have a digital currency. Okay, and now why payment with digital currency is supposed to be something good, as opposed even better than the digital value? For one thing, when you make the payment, you don't have to exchange information about bank accounts. Okay, so there is less, it's supposed to be more secure. And then the protections are on, what to speak, on the issuer, that's to say, to protect the currency itself rather than the numerous kind of bank account, or at least this is theory. How much it's completely true, I don't know, but this is the argument. And then, sorry, I just want to, yeah, here we get, and again, we are kind of, this is a difference between centralized system, which is what we have now. We have our accounts with the bank. Our bank may have accounts with other banks. The other bank may have accounts with other, but it's all kind of based on this centralized kind of things in the middle. And this is the distributed, which essentially you do. So here it's based on the centralized ledger. Here there is ledger with multiple copies, which is authentic in any of this computer. And this is which of course leads us to Bitcoin and to the cryptocurrency. And yeah, and again, I mean, in a sense, those of you who got a little bit things that I, if I confuse you to a point, there are still three separate concepts that I'll explain each one of them as I'm now moving on. Cryptocurrency, digital currency, and virtual currency. Until now, I kind of did some kind of a salad with them. But and I'm no better than the media. That's what I'm trying to say. Until now, soon I'll be better. But yeah, I will. Yeah. So for one thing is that again, we still don't make this distinction. But what we are talking is a digital currency, which I would say is a broader word for it. It could be centralized. In other words, you could still have, it doesn't have to be like Bitcoin. It has to be, it could be like this in a sense that there will be mathematical formulas for coins, and exactly like I'm paying you physically by $20 bill, I'll pay you with $20 digital bill. Okay, but it will still be somewhere centrally a ledger which will tell you basically, which will give me the bill and will record now who is the owner of the bill. And could be decentralized, and which is then is issued, transferred, and redeemed over distributed ledger. And then there is a hybrid, which, as you see, it's quite important, issued centrally, but still transferred on a distributed ledger. And okay, the rest I don't want, but that's it. And then we do have another distinction between self-anchored, which is, these are the cryptocurrencies, okay? The cryptocurrencies are mathematical creatures. They hinge on cryptographic algorithm, not only for the protection against hacking, but also to control the creation of new units and facilitate payments. What I mean by that? I mean by that cryptography is a science of secrecy, if I can say so. I send you a message, and only you will understand what it is, because either we share a code, or we do have what we tend to call a asymmetric cryptography, which is, this is what this is all about. I have a private key and public key. You have a private key and public key. The public key is known to everybody. The private key is derived from the public key, and essentially if I send you a message, then I'll use my private key and your public key, and you will be able to find out what I meant by using your private key and my public key. So far so good when it comes to communication, but then you could do, this is all based on this, as I'm saying, communication is based on algorithm, which is mathematical problems, and then you can use the same kind of technology also to create, to define the coins. And again, this is where I am, as I say, technology is not my field, but the idea is that you're using the algorithm not just the protection against hacking, but also to control the creation and facilitate and facilitate the payment. But then the problem is that it doesn't have a fixed value, because it all depends how this algorithm operates in terms of the mathematics and how many there are, and what is well, that's basically the problem with it, that it can be one Bitcoin, but the question is how much one Bitcoin is worth. And then the other side of it is the claim check format, which can be only if it is centrally issued, that you could make sure that this digital coin would have a value of 1 ounce of 1 ounce of gold, of $1, of one, and that is of course something that will be much popular, as we'll see with central banks. So virtual currency has been a term which was used for basically for digital currency issued privately. Okay, this is and the only thing which we do have by way of legislation by now is in the US, which essentially it doesn't deal with the virtual currencies themselves, but rather with the protection of the public in terms of which institutions can deal with them and what are the requirements for this institution. But they define again virtual currency is representation of value, which is not legal tender, etc. And Well, that's basically what it is, and I don't want to, add that. So Bitcoin, of course, will fall into it. And then we get now to the decentralized. So they are based on the distributed ledger. That is that way that I showed it earlier. It is an asset-based database that can be shared across a network, multiple sites, geographical or institutions. And the technology, the blockchain, is the digital implementation. It's a type of a database that takes the number of records, puts them in a block. Each block is then chained to the next block using cryptographic signature. This allows blockchain to be used like a ledger, which can be shared and corroborated by anyone with appropriate permission. And this is how kind of basically how it looks, in a sense that these are the computers, and these are the entities which are making the payment, and the nodes are when it comes to the Bitcoin, are those that are, so every message, every transfer has the algorithm, and the miner are supposed to compete who will solve the mathematical problem, and whoever is first is the one that gets some kind of reward in Bitcoins. And that's the only way how Bitcoins are kind of added to the system. And so it's all done kind of decentrally. And everybody could be a miner if you have the right computer power, etc. And that's kind of the attraction. There's no government, and etc., etc., etc. We'll talk about it more. So Bitcoin is a virtual, self-anchored cryptocurrency, peer-to-peer, decentralized system. And this is a definition by its founders. Electronic coin consisting of a chain of digital signature transferable from payer to payee by digitally signing a hash, which is a way of abbreviating messages, but of the previous transactions, etc. The point of Bitcoin is that, again, that it is everything is kind of done on, so to speak, on the chain, and therefore it's not a something that there is no centralized kind of person. But of course, the idea is that then you don't need the centralized, and which does have, of course, a lot of ideological persuasion to all those who don't like government, but then the question, what else is gained by this? And this is what we'll talk in later. So each coin has a verifiable mathematical properties, is unique solution to mathematical problem, and that is basically, never mind the monetary fluid, don't time to go over that. The point, though, is that the miners, it's very difficult to solve the problem, so to speak, and this is again something which I cannot comprehend, but I can restate. It's difficult to solve the problem, but easy to find out that the solution was right. So once the problem is solved, everybody can see that the solution was right, and therefore everybody then agrees. Okay, that's kind of the idea. That it's difficult to find it, but once it's found, well, that was easy, something like that, which is, of course, doesn't say it was easy, but it's easy to verify. Okay, now what is again the blockchain is a public ledger of all the transaction, and essentially the way that it go, people would have a wallet, the wallet have email address, and then through this wallet you'd make this kind of transaction. Okay, I don't want to go into these details because, well, this is simply part of it's out of time. But what I want to say is that the downside is that, of course, of Bitcoin is that one day maybe somebody will break the path. Now, here depends to whom you talk. If you talk to the adversaries, they will say, just wait until there will be quantum computers, and again, one day, one 16-year-old genius will find a way to break it. The others say, no, this will never happen. I don't know to whom to believe, but that's kind of an issue. Now, the infinite amount, which is 21 million, is a double-edged sword or blessing in disguise or whatever, because on one hand it keeps the value, but on the other hand, what would happen next? And in the sense, then, you know, it also has this deflationary kind of impact if the value cannot be increased at some point. This is actually the big problem, the poor scalability. The blockchain does process about, at this point, 6 or 7 transactions per second. Visa and MasterCard, you're talking in the thousands per second, just to give you an idea that how much this cannot be an immediate kind of retail kind of payment. And then there is a societal interest at the end of the day, well, which is exactly why some people love it, but you can hide wealth. And you know, a question to which I didn't get an answer is, okay, suppose there is judgment against me, how can you get to my bitcoins without my cooperation? The answer is you cannot. Okay, you can put me in jail, you can, I don't know, you can torture me, but you cannot, I mean, it's not, you cannot bring the police with explosives to get into the safe, okay? There is no, yeah, that's it, I don't say to anybody, and that's it, I'll go to jail, okay? So these are kind of the issue. And now we get to the question, why do we need it, okay, if this is all that? So this guy actually, he wrote a very thoughtful book about Bitcoin. I don't share his take on history because he tends to claim it, to compare it to gold, which might be correct, but he is very, he thinks that the gold era was a golden era of history, which I totally disagree, but his analysis of the Bitcoin as an analogy to gold is kind of brilliant. And what he's saying is, of course, that Bitcoin will never work as a retail system or a system of payment between individuals because Bitcoin has blockchain not because it allows for faster, cheaper transaction, but because it removes the need of trust in third-party intermediation. Transactions are cleared because the nodes compete to verify them, and yet no node need to be trusted. Whether removing the third-party intermediation is a strong enough advantage to justify increased inefficiency of the distributed ledgers is a question that can only be answered in the coming years, etc., etc. So that is his but as we'll see, he will still find a use for Bitcoin. And what he's saying is that it is, what he's saying here is, again, I'll not read it, but I'll just say, is essentially saying a few very important things. One is that the Bitcoin is why it is equivalent to gold because it is, so to speak, this is expressions that you use. It's high ratio to stock to the flow. In other words, you remember, you cannot. The amount cannot be. The more people who want Bitcoin, it doesn't mean that you cannot. The amount cannot increase dramatically because of the built-in system. So that's why it's kind of very much like the gold. But what he says, and that's kind of the interesting thing, he says that essentially what keeps Bitcoin going is that the high processing power is something which makes it very difficult to hack, okay, which is a good, but also, and that is the beauty of the system, that it really pays off to people to become miners than to hack the system, okay? In other words, to hack the system is kind of close to impossible because of the computer power that you need. So this is why you do have this guaranteed neutrality and guaranteed lack of cooperation that would say will never happen among the miners because each one of them will always want to beat the other. And that again, some people argue about the simplicity of it, but this kind of concept that you that it's if you can't beat them, join them. You know, it's almost like the dream of every society engineer is to make that it will pay off better to people to make money by complying with the law rather than by breaking the law. So that's basically what is there. That it's better to invest in kind of getting the more Bitcoins through the mining rather than to start thinking of how to hack the system. That is what he's saying. And then this is his other very interesting insight, which I want to share with you. That at the end, when people say, okay, let's avoid, this is waste, too much power is used, let's find something else that will consensus over the blockchain. Yes, people found it, but then it was always by way of compromising the neutrality of the system, because either you have to trust some third-party notary, good luck. So if you have trust third-party notary, why wouldn't you trust a third party in a centralized system, right? I mean, why do you need then the or there are all sorts of proof of stake and all these things kind of basically allow control on the issuer, basically to manipulate the value by issuing more or less, etc. But he says that the beauty of Bitcoin is this kind of, as I'm saying, this almost well, the fact that it is so inefficient and so and therefore kind of it's kind of faithful to its ideology in a sense, but at what cost and for what purpose? That is precisely the question. So it is not for a basically retail payment. And then he gives some other examples, or not only him, I mean, the other examples. There are Ethereum and Ripple, which do have digital currencies, but there are more tokens for use of the system. Ripple is for the sake of basically fund transfer in normal currencies. Ethereum is basically a so to speak, how to call it, a smart contract. But again, the whole point is they avoid the kind of miners in favor of something else, but that something else does have control on the system. So what is the point? Okay. Yeah, now, and here I'm kind of starting, yeah, this is kind of getting central banks. So some central banks have been toying with this idea of issuing centrally a digital currency, and but still place it on a blockchain, which is again begs the question why they will need it. And I will skip this one because again we are a little bit we are at some time, but we'll. So what I want to say here is that what again this is and I'll go back to Amos. Then what he's saying is that because he's thinking of Bitcoin as the equivalent of gold, then he's thinking about dismantling all the central bank systems, and essentially all Bitcoin becomes a value into which banks settle with each other, but we people are basically getting from our banks instruments denominated in Bitcoin. Okay, so we're going to have the banks, we're going to have the issues, but they are going to process it centrally, the way that they're centralizing, the way that they are doing everything centrally. But for the banks, because it's just kind of at the end of the day, a few transactions, then they will do it in Bitcoin. And this way, the state will not issue money at all. Again, I'm telling you, this guy, that was his obsession, that the state is no good in terms of issuing money, etc. And I don't share this view, and I don't ask anyone to share. No, but I'm just explaining this explanation to Bitcoin as kind of concept of gold, which would replace gold as the basically basic currency, but we will continue to make payments through bank accounts denominated in various kind of Bitcoins. That is his vision, I'm not saying. Now we're getting towards the end. Cryptography, as I'm saying, was based on this mathematics, okay? And or this algorithm. And then the other alternative is to go to what people call randomness, which is the idea is randomness cannot be broken other than by guessing. and therefore people could, some, well, are called computer scientists, consider it so to speak, superior to the system of cryptography. And there's a randomized coins, string totally patternless, okay, so that's just I'm kind of telling you. And tethering is also the possibility which does not work with cryptocurrency, but apparently does work with, if it is randomized, that you can build in limitation to the use of the money, and this would create kind of a real revolution, like suppose I got grant to buy books. Today I have to show that I bought books, but let's say the grant this kind of digital currency that I will get will be directly linked to the fact that I could use it only for book seller, etc. Good or bad, or how much it can work, I don't know. But what I want to conclude is with these two proposed centralized central bank digital currency and actually claim check schemes. In other words, they are not based on cryptography, they are not based on blockchain, and they have kind of modest start, and I don't know how far they will go, but they have kind of some kind of promising start. So Wincash essentially is an idea that actually now very prevalent in the United States, not idea, I mean it's a company, it's a proposal, that people would have basically instead of getting from the machine banknotes, you will get on your telephone, you'll get digital currencies, which are actually, there will be web page, that's what he kind of how he defined it, which will be register of ownership, and this is how you pay from one from another. And of course, there will be big saving in terms of banknotes, in terms of Brinks cards going all over, etc., etc. So this is the Wincash, and as I say, it's not cryptocurrency. It could be virtual currency because it's also issued privately, but it could also be issued by the central bank, and the current proposal is for the Federal Reserve to issue it. So then it would be a central bank kind of currency. And the other is Bitmint, which is again centralized scheme for randomized tethered. I think it's more sophisticated than Wincash, but how much is it's more pragmatic, practical or not, I don't know. Tethered, non-speculative and stable claim check to define quantity of a specific commodity, including fiat currency. Instead to be identified as, as somebody said in Germany, that it is a universal digital representation of worldwide currencies. So, if we are then to go into, this is kind of a concluding slide. I'm not sure. We are in some way, of course, Bitcoin started as a revolution, that's for sure. But then I think that with all the deficiencies of the blockchain, and it's, I think it's a brilliant idea. I just really don't see how in the near future it's going to be all that good. Again, and I'm not talking about those who want to make money out of it, that's a different thing, but I don't see as why it's so advantageous to the digital, as long as we unfortunately need the state for whatever reason. Okay, we can live in completely libertarian society, well, but I don't think that this is only depends on that one. So I think that at the end, if it started as a revolution, it's ended up more as evolution, in a sense that it was tamed into the electronic, so to say, framework that the central bank now or can basically issue. I think that this is what we will hear more, that central banks could issue more of there may be other uses, but I think that this is going to be, that the central banks is going to issue, on one hand, there may be more access to digital currency, to central bank money, to central bank money. And on the other hand, there may be these uses of digital currencies, which are still issued by the central bank, in which we shall pay instead of paying with physical banknotes. Central Banks of China is working on it, and the United States, as I mentioned, does have this idea with actually with Wincash. But again, I mean, I don't know how much this will kind of work or not work. So where the law does stand in all that, yes, the law will have to adjust itself in a sense of getting the fact that money is not just physical thing or bank account. But I don't think it's going to be all that revolution. I think that if the law has to work hard to adjust itself to the reality of the blockchain, that for sure. But how much the blockchain is any good, this time will tell. As you can see, I am a little bit skeptic about it. So thank you very much, and yeah, if you have any question, I'm here.